Welcome, friends and fiends of the pod. I'm your host, film critic and comedian Nate Wyckoff, reminding you to like, subscribe, and go to cultandclassicfilms.com, where you can purchase exclusive cult ultra low budget films from us. And you can also subscribe and have them delivered monthly at a big discount to your door every month. So don't miss out on that. And unlike Rowdy Piper here and They Live, you don't need special glasses to see these deals. All right. So please, thank you and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Cult and Classic.
Welcome, friends and fiends, to another episode of Cult and Classic Films podcast. I'm your host, as always, film critic and comedian Nate Wyckoff. This is a super special episode because we are interviewing the great Tobias Jelinek.
Hello,
right?
everybody. I'm so excited to be here with you. Yeah.
So Tobias has been in everything, so we're going to go over a lot. But I think probably most of us can immediately picture you from Hocus Pocus as the bully Jay with your long blonde hair. Was that a wig or was that?
Oh, no. That was real.
Excellent.
Yes.
That's wonderful. I had hair down to the middle of my back in high school, and I was definitely a little metalhead. And that, you know,
I can see it. Yeah.
I can never go back to that. It's just too much dedication of time. So I really appreciate you being here. Like I said, you've been in pretty much every genre, every film medium, and you actually did I remember correctly that you started on stage?
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely. That stage actually led to my first real audition, which led to Hocus Pocus. I was doing community theater in Santa Barbara, and a Disney scout came and saw this production, and they knew the director who works a lot with kids, and it led to an audition, my first audition, which was Hocus Pocus. I was a kid in Santa Barbara, and then they were doing these cattle call auditions. I went to the Disney lot, had my long hair, and it led to me booking Hocus Pocus. So it was a great first story for
that's fantastic. Well,
yeah.
And it's sort of, I know my wife has acted as well, and community theater at a certain point always felt it's like you're like, is it worth it? Am I going to do it? I'm not getting paid. It takes a lot of time. I'm doing it for the love. But to know that, especially to hear that it actually does matter, people go, especially where you're located. Some places, like I'm originally from, most recently from the East Coast, and
Cool.
everybody casts, Boston casts in New York for their paid shows.
Yes.
They don't cast anywhere else. So it's like you have a lot of competition. You have to travel to get there. And so you end up doing a lot of community theater because it's what's available, but also it kind of teaches you a lot, I think. Especially being on stage, there's no second takes,
Yeah, I think now more than ever. I also think after the pandemic, people went inside. There's a lot of insular and people trying to find a way to connect. And I am advocating more than ever for in-person opportunities to connect. I mean, theater is wonderful, and it doesn't need to be that traditional model of rehearsing for 6 weeks and whatnot. And it's great. We're seeing a lot of younger performers and even younger professionals making time for it here in LA. I'm seeing it, and it's really great. It's refreshing, and I hope we come back to it even more. You learn things you just can't touch with screen, and I learned more about really just the idea of ensemble is so valuable for screen work, because it's easy, I think, for a lot of actors when you do just a scene study class, it can very much be people going up doing their work, and then the idea of, okay, I take this to set. But there's so many people involved in making, of course, TV and film, and it reminds you of that ensemble mentality, which helps you chill out. It helps you relax and realize you're a part of something rather than,
everything relies on my lines at this moment.
Yeah.
And the reactivity too. I know that just from, I haven't done a ton of acting, but from the acting classes, you're like, your lines need to be a natural reaction to the scene and the people, which is something that is, especially, we do a lot of cult cinema, which we love. And that includes a lot of wonderfully bad movies. And you get people who they're not familiar with it. So it's instant walk in, do lines, walk away. There's the back and forth isn't there. And I think when you're in a live audience, it's like stand up. Even if you have your routine clear and memorized and fairly strict, you have to connect with that audience. And it just helps you to do that when there are actually people in the room, and you know that
Yeah.
it's not just a camera that you're trying to play to, rather you're playing to the people in the room.
Yeah. Now, Hocus Pocus was an interesting one, um, because the director, well, that's, we're talking cult, there's interesting people in that, like,
Hmm.
or who involved behind the scenes, Mick Harris, who, who's involved, I mean, incredible genre films
Yeah.
that he's been involved with.
Oh
And then
yes.
David Kirshner, who was also a producer, that's Child's Play and a lot of it. He's
Yes.
actually done a very interesting new podcast on D&D with Ham, John Hamm.
Yeah, I've
So,
seen that, and
oh, I
I
want
love
to.
I love it. I
Okay.
love the revival that sort of D&D. And I mean,
Yeah.
podcasts, it's like you said with the pandemic. I mean, we were one of the many podcasts that launched during the pandemic, and it was that it's that desperate way to sort of, how do we connect when we can't be together? And it's actually opened up, like, I'm talking to you, we're not in the same room,
Yep.
like, it's wonderful to be able to talk face to face, but we actually have this way that we're all more familiar with now, and so it's more natural,
Yep.
where we can communicate from wherever, and it leaves a lot of opportunity, like I get to talk to
Yeah.
you. um so speaking, since we just talked about stage, you returned to stage with one of the best things I've ever seen on stage. I've worked for a lot of stage shows. I've worked with drag queens extensively for Golden Girls Live and things like that, where you bring pre-existing properties to the stage in a new way. But Point Break Live is a whole nother level. Um, Tell me about how that you started getting involved, because you play, for anybody familiar with Point Break, it's sort of a sort of a cop drama surfing movie
So
where you have,
incredible.
it's so wild. Keanu Reeves plays Johnny Utah, who infiltrates a group of surfers led by the very charismatic Bodhi, who is you play,
Yeah.
sort of a play on Bodhisattva, and
Patrick Swayze,
Patrick
and he just is
Swayze, one of his
incredible.
most
Yeah.
iconic roles.
Yeah.
Uh, and so Point Break Live is so much more than just the film. How did you get involved in that?
That was one, this was like just a straight up audition. I remember seeing an LA casting post for that, and I was like, what is this?
Hmm.
What are they doing? They had just come from New York. The thing about Point Break Live, which I became so fascinated with the history of it, because it really blew up here in LA when
Yeah.
we launched here in LA. It was, of course, meant to come to Los Angeles,
Hmm.
but it started in Seattle, and there was a lot of very interesting, rather forward-thinking theater in Seattle
Hmm.
really, like, in the right around the early 2000s. I
Hmm.
did another incredible, like, 80s genre called Money and Run. Phenomenal, this series. And we would do like slow-mo fight scenes, and it was very well written. But it came out right around the same time as Point Break Live. And then they started, it was like a group of friends that decided to act Point Break in a garage, but cast the role of Johnny Utah from the audience. So whoever came could
It's
come
so
up on
excellent.
audition. The audience would choose their Johnny Utah. We take him back. They take him backstage, dress him up, and then there, of course, was a production assistant who was feeding him lines, because whoever they had no idea the lines,
Right.
which create that wonderful Johnny Utah. Just the clue, just walking through, not quite knowing where he's
The
going.
early Keanu Reeves sort of
Really,
fish out of
Keanu Reeves.
water,
I
like,
love Keanu.
got,
Yes,
oh, it's
just
great.
all that. Some of the Bill and Ted's, and they, there's some of that lingering in Point Break, and
Hmm.
and of course there's a Catherine Bigelow director character who would come in
Hmm.
and yell cut whenever there was an action scene, bring in usually like a stunt double, and then
Hmm.
we would do incredible fight sequences.
I
But
mean, you guys had rope work, you had all
oh
sorts of
yeah, so
things
we would do
involved. Like,
for the
it's pretty
I
intense.
hope if you haven't seen the film, watch the film, because it's incredible in
It
its
was
own
just
right.
released on 4K, and I have to be totally, I had never seen the film. In fact,
Oh,
our
okay.
friend
Yeah.
who hooked us up together, Elizabeth, she took me to see it
Oh,
because
great.
I hadn't seen it, and I love Keanu, I love Patrick Swayze, and I
Yeah.
Catherine Bigelow, of course, and I love um Gary Busey, a big
Busey.
Gary Busey fan on here,
Yes.
and so getting to see everyone together, and the fact that it's such if you look at it on paper, it is a truly ridiculous, like late 90s could only happen
Yeah,
kind of that mindset era. Cop must infiltrate crime,
yeah.
like robber surfer group. Like it just sounds completely wild. But the film is played completely straight, and it's almost
Captain
sometimes
Bigelow.
it's got police
Yeah,
procedural. It's just a beautiful film too, like
yeah,
the surfing everything. So it is like this different beast, and you guys
yeah,
brought with Point Break Live, it becomes even more because it's got the like Rocky Horror interactivity to the next level,
yeah.
and the fact that the lead character is cast from the audience and is essentially the one that is sort of not in the dark necessarily. I'm sure there are a lot of different types who've
That played it.
yeah
Yeah, some
um
people were. Some people had never seen the film. Um, and that's the thing. Like, to go back, because you just reminded me. I mean, it's great to note, like with the film, it is high octane. Every kind of action sequence you have, like the bank robberies or the ex-president. So Patrick
yep
Swayze and his crew. Where's the ex-president masks? And you're going in, and there's you can see the staginess of that. But there's of course the car chases, and there's the
skydiving
climax, the skydiving. So there's skydiving where there's the action sequence and even fighting happening, of course, with the skydiving. So to put all of this on stage in itself, it's how can you put surfing, chase
hmm
scenes, skydiving, bank robberies all on stage, and then of course, it's including the audience where it's not just their lead character, but when the people come in, they're given a poncho,
hmm
they're given fake money, and for all the surf sequence for the storms, there's super soakers that come out, so everybody's
yes
getting drenched, everybody's thrown on the floor for the bank robbers, and then people are taken as hostage. So it was really, if you can imagine, just no. And then of course what made it work for so long, because we were sold out for 10 years, and it was really at the point just being like, okay, I think it's time.
we got to pull it, yeah.
Yeah, even though I mean, it expanded tremendously, where San Francisco, Las
hmm
Vegas, and then other cities started, popping it up. But it really became something where everybody in the industry was coming to it because it was so enjoyable,
hmm
uh, because everyone had so much fun, and you were really a part of the experience.
People in
Is
the
what really,
film
yeah.
came
Oh
to
yeah,
see it.
Captain Bigelow, Gary Busey. We almost Patrick Swayze. He was scheduled to come,
hmm
and it's when it was right when when he became too
yeah
sick and he wasn't able to make it. It was, which was very unfortunate. It also was just a sign of that time, like the
hmm
time capsule of the film. The writers would come frequently, and then a lot of other A-list celebrities just started coming for the
hmm
for the enjoyment of it.
well, and all my
Yeah,
my drag community friends went, and because it is such a I one person told me it's like, because I mentioned the Golden Girls, because this a lot of it's a camp sensibility, right? You bring this,
yeah,
it's self-aware, that
yeah.
it's both goofy but also as you said, it's highly orchestrated, and it just
Yep.
really adds, like you said, it mirrors the film, because the film is these giant set pieces, between the surfing and all the chase scenes, and you've got like a Terminator-esque
Yeah,
city, narrow city chase scenes, things like that. and
yeah,
um
yeah.
and and it was said that's like, Golden Girls Live is the primary gay and older women group, and Point Break Live is that side of uh you know 90s kids, 2000 people,
So
the male masculine fantasy that we
yeah,
all love in those films. And but there's this crossover section because they both have this camp and this theater together. And it's one day we will bring a revival to Palm Springs. I that is a
ah,
mission. I want
yeah,
that so much. And so I, it's just that was brilliant. And what I love about it too is a lot of times we hear this all the time, in LA especially, uh people who are, oh, I would love to return to stage, that's really my first love.
right.
Well, we know too that sometimes it's your first love, other times people don't want to do it anymore because it's actually quite hard. you
Yeah,
know and the
yeah,
money is not necessarily there,
yeah.
unless you're a Dina Menzel now kind of thing.
Hmm.
um but the labor of love involved in this, it kind of, I can see it in preparing to talk to you, going back and watching roles that I was like, oh, that's right, you were in this, you were in this.
Okay.
uh you, even when you're playing a serious character, what I love in performances is when I can see that in some way the actor's enjoying it. You're you actually are doing it for a love, and it comes through, because I'm sure that there were plenty of times when it was not a fun job. But it always seems like you still want to be there because you're engaged. And that is so
Oh,
critical
thank
to an
you.
enjoyment
Yeah,
of a film or a TV show. And you've done, I'm not kidding, you've done a huge variety of shows. I mean, you were on the first, I think about the almost the first whole season of Stranger Things.
yeah,
You were the one of the lead agents.
yeah.
And what was it like working the Duffy brothers were from my undergrad alma mater. What was it
Oh,
like
great.
working on
Chapman.
those
Yeah,
on that? Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
What was it like
Cool.
working on that set, especially since, it was a first season. It was a very
Yeah.
nostalgic show. We didn't have much like it.
Mhm.
The only real parallels were very much adult-oriented shows with a sort of a shock value, like American Horror Story from Ryan Murphy, things like that. So you don't really know how it's going to play in the grand scheme
Yep.
of things. What was it like being involved in that? What was the set like? Were they, the Duffy brothers, they were new. They done some, but it's new. It's a whole new thing. So I'm sure they were learning. In
Yep.
addition, you and the cast, many of are more were more experienced, which I think is probably often the case. So what was it like?
Um, I think I don't think there really had been anything else like that show.
Mm-mm.
Um, and we have to remember it's things have been moving so quickly. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, but
Mm-hmm.
what were we? 2005. But look, that's 9 years ago.
Right. I can't
I
think
think I
about it,
got
but
that
yeah.
right. 2005 or 2006. But and the thing to bear in mind is nobody knew what that show
Hmm.
was going to be. I mean, they obviously had faith in it. With the Duffer Brothers, they were young, and what's incredible about what Netflix did then is
Hmm.
they really created the space for them to explore their
Hmm.
vision. And it wasn't just I mean, that's the thing. We have, of course, the Stephen King, the Carpenter references,
Hmm.
everything. I mean, it goes very nuanced because they
The
really knew their stuff.
Spielbergian kids, involved
Yes,
in a
ET,
greater
all of this,
scheme. Yeah.
but video games as well. That's the thing, is these two like they also, that's a part of what I also think is that secret sauce, the
Hmm.
soundtrack as well.
Soundtrack, and
There's
it
yeah,
moves with the show. It
yeah,
grows with the show, just like the actors, just like
yeah.
we, as we get to know them, it has to bring some new things. Um, and I think, and it is interesting you said Netflix then, because
Hmm.
a lot of great shows, a lot of people have great deals with Netflix. Some people have harder deals with Netflix. I know many
Hmm.
writers of my friend that have a very tough
Okay.
time. But at that time, it did seem like they were much more willing to go the distance to let a show develop. Whereas now, there's a lot of there are people who are willing to put their content for almost nothing, right? Because they want it out there, especially on such a wide platform. And so
Yeah.
you end up getting, I think, shows that just they don't get their legs fully under them before they're wrapped.
Yes.
And that's sort of, so it's
It's
really great.
unfortunate.
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
unfortunate. And I mean, I think not that it hasn't happened in decades with main, large
Hmm.
broadcast companies as well, but I think in the past we have had more of a less risk averse to something like that. And now, because we have so many competing things, people want a surefire. There's one show like Stranger Things, and then there's 12 other shows that kind of try and emulate it to a certain point. And most of them don't last because they're not working off an originality. They don't have the time to develop originality. They're sold on the premise that they are comparable. Um, this, and of course, we don't. Some people name names, some people don't. What was your toughest experience in film and television? Because I think that's often helpful to hear, because we so often hear about these great experiences, but
Yeah.
for a fact, anyone that lives in California and knows people or does act themselves knows that there are some not great experiences, and you have to kind of learn how to learn from it, or at least move past them, so it doesn't hurt so bad.
Yeah. Well, this one, I'll go actually literal on that, which is with, physically tough,
Hmm.
physically painful.
Hmm.
I did, because I really loved the group. It was an incredible group. I did this. I was playing the lead in this
Fire City.
Fire City.
Yes.
and I love the group. And they brought in some, I mean, the talent on there, it opened my eyes to the magnificence of FX.
Yes, it's
And
very
I was,
effect heavy
yes, and all
production.
practical, and it's
Practical
all
effect, yeah.
practical. And that was kind of an homage to practical, because a lot of those guys, who were at the top of their game, were still in the industry, but really seeing this turn towards CG, and also seeing how creative decisions were being made much more by the committee, right? Where everybody's
Yes.
looking more at a little model or something just that's a graphic. And well, what if his ears were a little higher, rather than the happy accidents of a character being brought to life, or how the actor might put it on and
What
start
they
to,
might bring to that
yeah,
experience, yeah.
yeah, but it's physical. And so I had they had built a cowl for me, a headpiece that I would slip on. And we were going, it was fast. We were doing that. I believe it may have even been like 28 days or somewhere around there, or 21 to 28 days, and long days. And it wasn't properly sized inside. And around the 5th or 6th day, my skin had been completely removed off
Yeah.
my ears. And we still had to go. There's no way of really reshaping it. I remember we would tape cotton balls all over my ear, but I was in for like 14 hours.
Yeah.
So you put that in, and the stinging sensation is there. And we also, because it was very low budget, I would have my lenses in sometimes for very long periods where we wouldn't take them out because it would have hurt almost more to take them out,
Right, and put them
in.
back in, yeah.
Yes. So I remember what I learned was very much a mindful meditation with the pain.
Yeah.
Where instead of fighting it, it was completely embracing it. And it was energizing at a certain point. At a certain point, I would bring all of that into the performance, and you learn over and over again, even as you're talking about reaction, right? To other actors, the reaction to your environment and the embrace of what's happening.
Yeah, I can totally see it. I mean, that headpiece must have been heavy, because it's not
Yeah.
just a headpiece. It has like a backward progress to these spikes. He's a demon.
He's a demon. Yes.
And it's
Yes.
so our listeners, right up your alley. I hadn't actually seen the film until I knew we were going to talk, because I don't know how it went fairly under the radar, because it's Tom Woodruff Jr., his special effects skills have graced everything from,
incredible.
I mean, the Jurassic World series all the way to puppetry in B horror films. I mean, really the kind of stuff that I eat up. And so to see him helm a project like this, where he get to sort of, he was in control, was really great.
And all of his friends, the people he called in. I mean, there's another great FX guy on there named David Elsey, who's worth looking up his resume, Elsey, but incredible Brit. And just especially going into the folklore of werewolves and vampires and Sherlock Holmes. He's an aficionado on Sherlock Holmes. He's called in on films. Just incredible. These people. I think for your listeners especially, the archive with these players, they know almost more than anybody when it comes to the genre films. They really love it.
Yeah, it is one of those things where, much like when you love a craft, like acting, when you're sort of dedicated to it because you care about it and because it interests you, as cult film, genre film fans, I think a lot of people who haven't explored it to a certain extent, or maybe it's just not their sensibility, they don't see the connection where it is more than just watching it. Sometimes the rough edges actually connect us more, because we feel part of the production. We can see just enough, imagine just enough behind the camera, that it gets us in without breaking the illusion of what we're watching. And I think that's a huge draw to it. And for anyone who hasn't listened, Fire City End of Days is the name, the complete name. I believe Tom Woodruff Jr. actually did a short or two previously to set it up. And it is, I compare it in my head to Nightbreed, Clive Barker's sort of special effects laden monster, almost superhero kind of take on it. And so if you love that, check this out. Very
Do check it out.
Vibes.
There's a whole universe there. They had planned to do. I mean, they had a saga. And I don't think the funding came through, but you'll get pieces of it in this film, so you'll see where it could have gone, and then also what they were able to explore. I think it was great. We were talking about labors of love. this is another to go from Stranger Things
Hmm.
actually to Fire City is very interesting because Stranger Things really hit the zeitgeist. I mean, I had been in
Yep.
Atlanta for 10 months working on that, and we came back right before it was released, and my goodness, to see how much that affected everyone in the industry,
Hmm.
they were floored. It changed, I think, it changed
Oh,
a lot of people's approach.
absolutely. And it changed
Yeah,
a lot of foreign film approaches too to series. I mean, we started, I think the first sort of people to jump on like, oh, there's a level of escapism with character development realism
yeah,
that is really desired right now. And so we had, especially, I know we had some Spanish and Mexican productions, but those were sort of the first things that I think probably because of their ability to do quicker production schedules, they're used to having a pared down system, with less funding. They were able to come in and fill that spot, and we took even longer in the States to sort of follow up, and that also caused,
yeah,
so many other competitors, which is I think why something like Stranger Things still stands, as sort of the peak, because it, like you said, it hit the zeitgeist just right,
yeah.
and it was given the support. And you also, speaking of, I was actually thinking when I was watching Fire City, I was like, oh, I could tell like this is something I could see continued in novels and comics because
Yes.
it's very rich. It just feels like it was a great setup. Like it almost felt like one of those, which I love, those 70s pilots that are actually a full movie that they would make,
Ah,
and then they would
yes,
hope, but
yes,
you had this complete, and
totally.
I loved that. Um, but you've been in, several comic book television features as well. You were in, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. for Marvel,
Yeah.
and then you were also, you were in Arrow.
DC's Arrow. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. I got to do the DC and Marvel universes.
I love it. And,
Which,
we
yeah.
talk a lot about comics on
Oh,
this
cool.
pod, and it's
Which is interesting. See, those are very interesting. Like to talk about Marvel for a second, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the politics
yeah.
of what can be explored,
Hmm.
what can be revealed, and then what gets cut.
Hmm.
That's something I, of course, wasn't in that writer's room, but they were
Right.
doing that dance up to the end. And I think it had a part in why it wasn't continued
I
after
think so
that
too.
last season. In terms of even, as Marvel's doing their films, several years at least in advance. And of
Hmm.
course, looking far beyond that, just you can't run the risk, even if a
Yeah.
show is loved by fans,
Yep.
and they're exploring a tangent. I mean, it seemed like it would have been tangential enough,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah. I
that tie-in,
remember, I always forget how to pronounce his name, but Kevin Feige, I think is how he pronounces
okay,
it. He talked about it once where with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., because you have carryover characters
mm-hmm.
directly from, Captain America and the filmic Marvel Cinematic Universe,
Yeah,
it seemed like it should have been completely aligned. And then at one point he said, I think it was at a convention, which always throws fans
yeah,
like a feral, tizzy about it. But he was like, no, it's not connected, which is, from a fan, it's frustrating. From knowing, having myself worked in comics, it's one of those
yeah,
things where you get it because, like you said, this is being worked so far in advance, and not only that, your writer's room for the show is not privy to this information, especially where
exactly.
you have a big cinematic property with so much money and you don't want leaks, you can't do any of that.
Yep.
It's like, and so it's sort of, it ends up cutting itself. Sometimes some would say, you know, cutting its nose off to spite its face, but it's
Yeah.
really a logistics issue. Um, and in the comic world, interestingly, I don't know if I mentioned this on the pod, but anybody that knows, DC was always famous for having these big yearly meetings where they would plan out all of the big events that would cross over titles. And Marvel did not do that for a long time because
Ah,
they were like, oh, we should have 4 Wolverine comics because he's super popular right now. And so they're like, well, you can't have him in 4 places at once, but we did. So you couldn't do these big story arcs with the same sort
ah.
of level um,
Oh,
of
interesting.
cohesiveness. Exactly. But they're both different approaches. And so I think in the filmic universe, that sort of carries over, although of course Warner Brothers has a tendency to pick up and drop and pick up and drop. But whereas
See, that's
whereas
interesting too when you talk about DC because that was all shot in Vancouver,
mhm,
and they took over that town. And what I remember is a lot of that because of the crossover. You
mhm,
would have not only directors, producers, but also cast on multiple sets,
yeah,
even in a given day, pulling crazy hours. But because of that, they found such a good thing. They really built up that
Yeah.
that universe, and it worked. It's kind of like what we see with the NCISs, in the
Yes.
procedure
Which you were
form.
also in at least one
I got to
NCIS
be in
series.
all of them.
I was
I
gonna say
loved it. I did every NCIS. I got NCIS Hawaii before it was shut down after 2 seasons. I was like, I got to get this before the show leaves. So yeah, I've done them all.
You're gonna do the
Yeah.
convention circuit for that now.
Yeah.
They're
Oh, are
they're
they?
around.
Yeah.
Um, so but that's awesome. And so when you're working in TV, I mean, you've done one-offs and you've done,
Yes.
season runs,
Mhm.
pretty much. What is the vibe versus being on a film set where, like, for Fire City, you have a 28-day shoot or something and it's all very compact? I'm sure it's even more so on a
Oh,
on a
yeah.
TV set.
Well, it's also interesting because look, even the directors are most of the time visitors,
Hmm.
right? And so they
Right.
do their research for
Called
the
mercenary
episode.
directing. Yeah.
Yeah. Where you have certain cast that, in a sense, or in a very real sense, are more senior. I love, Mark Harmon is a great example, and many people will use him as an example for how the model can work.
Hmm.
He really built this experience of ensemble, which
Hmm.
included the crew. And that's what's
Hmm.
different with TV is, yes, films also, they do go longer, but how about a show that's been going for 15, 16 years?
Right.
You have someone that starts as a production assistant, expresses interest in camera, becomes they work their
Yeah.
way up till they're like a camera op, and they suddenly are able to buy a home.
Hmm.
They've got, they've got a career, and you're a
It,
part of that.
yeah, and it becomes almost like a more traditional field, right? Because you do, even though
Yeah.
technically your contract, you work it, especially if you fit in with the group, they'll bring you back over and over
Yeah.
and over again. I met recently a costume person for Blue Bloods that it just
Oh,
ended,
cool.
and I was like, and he'd been on pretty much the whole run, I think,
Yeah.
most of the run at least, and it was one of those things. I was like, well, what's your next plan? He's like, I don't have one yet. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I've been working on this show nonstop,
Right. It's like a
for
family, a whole
years,
relationship. It's like, yeah, yeah, I'm going
and
through
it's
mourning, or yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Morning, rest, the whole deal. It's a total
yeah.
life change. It's like a retirement versus, switching from a season to season. Um,
But TV's, the thing with TV for actors, if you're doing a lot of guest stars, um, which I've done a lot of those. I've done a
mhm,
lot where, this is where you are also very appreciative for the union, because there are
yes.
certain standards. That's what you can actually expect as your, like, what's stable is
Hmm.
certain guarantees of how you'll be treated and able to do your work. That's that's really important. I
Yeah.
certainly didn't think about that in my younger years,
Hmm.
but I really appreciate it now. Even going up to Vancouver, where they're extremely friendly. It's still different. It's it's
Hmm.
it's like, and that it's really when you go to another system that you realize what has been cultivated
Yeah.
here is class, and there's heritage in that. There's
Hmm.
and there's a lot, and it's very much on mutual respect. That's what
Yeah.
these principles were originally built on. So that's different than film. I what I do love about films is that that sense of a holistic experience. You
Hmm.
get to read the book together. A lot of times with the series, you're either coming in for a pivotal moment
Hmm.
in that story. Maybe you can. What's exciting with TV is, of course, it can change.
Yeah.
You can become. That's phenomenal. I mean, that's like a traveling theater troupe in my
Hmm.
point of view, and it all comes down to the fans. That's like what I
Yeah.
what I
Speaking
love
of
about where.
reactivity, right? TV
Yeah.
is very reactive. You'll see entire
Yes.
plot points ditched for the next season because of the fan. Uh, I could call it feedback, or I could call it, rabble rousing. Like
It's
it's
participation. I mean,
yes,
this is where I think, for everyone who's listening, like the call to action now is really that we do demand shows are given the time
hmm,
to develop into what these visions are, because that's what you all like.
yeah,
That's what the creators want. And the thing is, we do have access to some of that information because creators, we're into more process now,
yeah,
right? So to know what the intention is behind it, it becomes important, and it rests a lot on the fan participation.
hmm.
When you do speak out, uh, they are listening, because that's also how things
Money.
are going to get
That's
paid
right.
for.
That's right.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I think I was actually thinking about this. I was reading the TV movie critic Emily Nussbaum's collection of essays just recently, and she talks about the sort of reactivity of TV versus film, because
Mm.
film, you put it out there and you go. You may
Yeah,
have a couple of focus groups, but it's not,
yeah.
especially depending on the budget of the film, that's just not going to change anything, or it changes very little. Um,
Mm.
and it was, I mean, her point was that it can both sometimes spoil something to a point if there is a larger vision, and other times it can assist, it can put you on track where you will continue, where otherwise you probably would have fallen into like that third season slump or something and lost a lot of viewers.
Yeah.
So there's this line to walk, and I think that's potentially why we're seeing so many showrunners now pitching and selling their shows as essentially miniseries that may end up being
Cool.
expanded later. And
Okay.
because you get control. Ryan Murphy was talking about this. And of course, he's, you know, God knows
Huge.
how many
And
shows at this
yeah,
point he's created. But
miniseries. If I choose to do it, I'll, yeah, yeah. He wants to,
right, exactly,
but it's seeing how
exactly.
the audience likes it.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. I'll put my name on it and that'll get the machine going and then
Yeah.
let's work on it. Um, but he's that's what he said. It's more control. And I think it was the assassination of Gianni Versace was like, it was written by one person, and I can't remember if it was 9 parts or
Nice.
what, but it's written by one person, and that's kind of unheard of in television for the most part. We'll get that in sometimes animated kid shows. You'll have one, but it's you usually it's a much it's still got that collaborative process of film, but I feel like the collaborative process tends to be not reduced but concentrated in the writer's room, and because you have people coming and going in the director's chair and sometimes in
Yep.
the production chair and the on set production. um when you pick, this is pivoting, but when you pick a project,
Yeah.
what do you look for, especially in a passion project? Because I know sometimes we get a project and we're like, sounds fun, it's close. I know that was for
Yeah.
me, it was always like, what's local?
Yeah.
But what on your dream parts, what do you look for?
It is pretty simple. I'm a real gut guy.
Hmm.
Um, and to be honest, I feel like most of us, when we find these moments, it's like for me, I like that the idea that roles find you
Hmm.
at the right time. And so I usually will get that feeling. I remember, as an example, this was TV. This was, Zach Galifianakis did this great show, Baskets,
Baskets, yeah.
and I got to kick off the second season with him, and we had a wonderful arc.
Hmm.
And when I saw the breakdown for that role, I had spent some time earlier in my life hopping freight trains, um, which was incredible. It's so hard to do that
Was that
nowadays.
from when you were in Virginia or past or?
Before that was like after I had gone to school back east. I was living in New York, and then a couple of guys from the South had wanted to make this film about hopping freight trains across the country.
Uh-huh.
And so I said, well, let's do it as a docudrama. Let's actually hop the freight train, see who we meet, and we'll incorporate it into the story. And we were terrible at hopping the freight trains. Terrible, terrible, because we had a production trailer,
Right.
not a huge, but we had a trailer. So you had an out. You
Yeah.
have an out. So you're only going to wait so long before you get impatient and say, we'll get the next one. No, so we actually did do a second trip where we said, okay, let's ditch the crew. Let's just ride the train and get some B-roll.
Hmm.
But I mentioned that because the story in Baskets was Zach Galifianakis joining this train hopping
Hmm.
crew, and I was the leader of this pack, and it struck so close to home, and it also felt like something that I needed to process, because that
Hmm.
experience had been a lot, and there were
I'm
some
sure
failures.
you met people of all different circumstance, because I know well, I think of the famous Nick Nolte, being essentially
Mm,
homeless for down and out in Beverly Hills and making
yeah,
it a very short time before he's like, I'm gonna go like I'm literally feeling like I'm going mad, like
yeah,
experiencing just a fraction of what people are actually experiencing. Um,
yeah.
so I can imagine that would be sort of it's that thing that sticks in the back of your head later on. You're like, whoa, I didn't even realize
Right,
how
right.
much
And
was
you get,
there.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's a part of, I think, like, for, with acting, I think all of us, no matter what industry you're in, no matter what you really do in life, we have, you know, acting just really shines a light on that. You know, a lot of it's the subconscious
Hmm.
associations, identifications that we carry with us. Some of them become so automatic.
Hmm.
Others we just don't remember, right?
Yeah, right.
You know,
Totally.
so I do, you know, I love when that feeling of this role found me comes up,
Hmm.
because it's this feeling too that the roles, it's like ideas. They're
Hmm.
out there. Are you going to be the one to actualize them?
Yeah.
Because we have so many ideas and we get inspired, of course. And if you don't grab it, or you're just not ready to, somebody else will. You know, I
Hmm.
love that. That's a part of our ensemble as humans, you know. So I do like when it feels like, ah, oh, yeah, this one's mine.
Yeah.
This one you get to actualize, and it's, you're in conversation with it. So I think that's for roles, but I also extend that to anyone with the, probably with writing, you know, with
Hmm.
anything. It starts coming together,
Yeah.
and you get to start embodying it, you know.
I
Yeah.
can very much so. I can feel that, and it's stand-up comedy very much too. You know,
Mm.
you'll come up, especially if you write things for other acts or productions too. You end up being at best on when you're writing for somebody else, you sort of embody what you think is their character, their as you know,
Uh-huh.
you try and put that in, but at worst, you're writing things that you have zero belief in, but you're like, well, this is going to, they're going to
Oh,
like this, right?
interesting.
It's a
Yeah.
mercenary job, you know, right? You're like, I know I'm doing this for them. I can do this to an extent, but of course, I know that if they were somebody really loved this and had this connection with them, then they could do a better job. Um, and you know, you feel, like you said, you feel that. I think it's a gut because you know, you meet who you're working with, you know, and you get that that sort of natural inclination, like, oh, you know, I get this person, or I'm interested in this person. And sometimes, of course, I think all of us have, where like I did not think I was going to connect with someone and I did. But for the
Yes.
most part, you know, it's much safer, more interesting if I click right away because I know then that there's something special. Um, one more thing before I want to talk about what's coming up for you, but
Yes.
I noticed that you were a PA on 8mm with Nicolas
Yes.
Cage. What was, I mean, that was early in your career. Well,
Yeah.
early. And
Yeah.
so what was that like, especially having, because you'd already done Hocus Pocus,
Did Hocus
right?
Pocus.
And
And yeah, I had done Hocus Pocus. I went back to being a teenager in Santa Barbara after that. I was like 15, 16.
yeah.
Went back, and then you know, because so that's all tied. I became friends with Joel Schumacher.
Hmm.
So
Which is pretty
that
great.
connected, you know, which is so great. You know, and so I had also been on Batman and Robin
Hmm.
and 8mm. Okay. So those two were back to back. I had started working at Cal Arts, working school. I went to school for a term, and I had met through Joel Schumacher, Bruce Berman, who was president of Warner Brothers at the
Yeah.
time, and then went on to become the CEO for Village Roadshow, uh, which was, and their one of their first hits was Matrix. So,
Hmm.
you know,
Right.
going
Yeah.
back,
And I mean, if you watch movies at all, you've seen their entrance logo
yes,
on
they're
some of
huge.
the biggest hits.
But it had, you know, I had gone through this time because I love storytelling. I Meeting them, I was very interested in behind the scenes, and
Hmm.
I even assisted Bruce. I went through this little identity crisis that didn't last long, where I started assisting him. He said, "Come in, be my assistant. In
Hmm.
2 years, you'll be associate producing." And I was 19, and I was working on the Warner
Oh,
Brothers lot, and I had screenwriters coming and pitching to me, and it wasn't my calling.
right.
You know, it took me a little while to figure that out and get back into school,
Hmm.
which led me to the East Coast. But 8mm was interesting because I also I would pick up Joaquin Phoenix every day. So I would
Which
go up
was
to his.
my favorite role of him. I mean, that was,
Oh,
if you think,
love it.
I tell people, if you think, you know, Arthur Fleck and Joker was a big step, I'm like, this character is
Yeah.
uh, real and completely different.
Yeah.
And so that was fun. So, but that's fascinating.
Yeah. So that was interesting. And then, you know, Nick Cage, this was such an interesting juncture for him.
Hmm.
I really thought 8mm was, as with a lot of Joel Schumacher films, where, I mean, like Lost Boys just hit.
Yes.
Lost Boys was magic.
And it still holds, which is,
Yes, it does.
you know, one of those
Yes, it does.
one of those. It's like you said, it's a rarity, right?
But then you have these other Joel Schumacher films. A
That
lot of them.
are
Well,
great.
also, Falling Down was great with Michael
Yes,
Douglas.
Michael Douglas, which I mean, that's one that when I first discovered it, you know, it's those films that just, you know, especially it really before it came out before I had really found my love in film. And
Yeah,
when I saw it, I was like, how come I don't hear people talking about
I
this?
know.
And
That's another
like you
one of
said,
those.
8 millimeter was one too, and that's actually we talked about it on the pod. We are big Nicolas Cage fans, so we've gone through a lot of his. We have a Nicolas Cage expert as one of
How
our.
about Flawless? Who even know Flawless? You have Robert De Niro and
Yes,
Philip Seymour Hoffman.
yes, and I think Philip Seymour in one of his strongest roles before his, you know, passing,
Right.
and so it is interesting. I hadn't thought about. I wonder too how much because I think of what was it was it yeah was it falling down? I can't even remember his. I mean
What?
his
Well,
his
well, also with Joel,
his filmography is huge.
the people he discovered. This is the thing that I learned about. You also have like Matthew McConaughey.
Hmm.
He really brought Matthew McConaughey out. Also, Colin Farrell was him.
Which
Tigerland.
yes, and
So it's interesting. The people he discovered. Demi Moore.
that's right. That's right.
So yeah, yeah,
I mean, well, and you can't run a film podcast without Schumacher all over it, because well, it's because also production. I mean, he's
yeah,
multifaceted in that way. He can pick it. I mean, Phone Booth was another one.
yeah,
What an impressive feat. And you know, you get things like critical reviews, but that's very different than getting um, uh, public memory, right?
yeah.
And but when you look at from a technical standpoint, from a writer, from a director, all that stuff, you look at I'm like this entire film, except for essentially phone call like talking
Right.
heads occasionally is in a phone booth, and it is
Yeah,
tense and impressive. Speaking of Colin Farrell, that was when I first really noticed him. I was like, oh
that
wow,
was it.
like
Yeah,
he carries an entire film that is essentially on his face, and he can't even walk, right?
yep,
Like I mean, and so you see something like that, and it's sort of like in comedy, we say things like, "Oh, she's a comedian's comic," right? You see this whole process that is more complicated, and maybe someone who's just casual will be like, "Oh, it was okay." But then when you start to get more and more into it, you know, you
right.
like music, you know, you learn a lot more the deeper you go, and then you appreciate things that are not. They're more nuanced, and they're sometimes a process thing that the average person wouldn't know. Um, and I
So
think
cool.
too. No, keep going.
These podcasts, see, this is the thing too, which is very exciting about podcasts like yours, is it becomes a part of we're going through our archives now, is I think a
Mm,
big part of what we're doing culturally,
yes.
and it's a part of our next step in digesting what we've actually become.
Hmm.
And what
It's a
what
good
is
point.
our
Yes.
culture? What do we
Right.
value? And because with media, it's just so pervasive now. And we're just as you're saying, where we're having stuff that's even put out before it should be put out, and it's this idea of generating content, which is a
Hmm.
lot. What's happened with the Netflix model. So it's interesting to show. It's like, well, let's talk about even just as you're saying, the multifaceted aspects of what we appreciate in a show, and and that's all. Like with Joel, it's interesting. I don't know if he was like in terms of a director. That's, as you're saying, with critical review and whether
Hmm.
he actually succeeded as a director is one part of it. His
Yeah.
production. We saw. I mean, it all started in costumes for him. It was all
That's
costumes.
right. Yeah.
You know, and some people say that's
Which
where he.
it's a
Yeah.
visual element, right? So you could
Yes.
really put. I think he carries that into because his films are very technically. I think of Brian De Palma, who when I was growing up,
Uh,
I didn't appreciate, and now I see. I'm like, oh, even when something may not be successful to me, it's because he stretched and tried something
that's
different
great.
and tried to
Yeah.
break the mold, and I'm like, oh, now I see from from that new angle. Bonnie the Vampire, the Vanity of the Bonfires had some of the
Yeah.
most incredible shots. I mean, every
Right.
scene is interest, and yet it's not the most successful film narratively, but you can't look away because there's so much engaging
Great.
things going on that he wanted to work into it. It's like
Yeah.
if you have a sin of if you have a sin when you're making a film, I'd rather it be excess than too minimal.
Yes, shoot
Um,
for it. Yeah,
exactly. Well, and I hear that in acting all the time from actors. You know, I'd rather you go farther and then
yeah.
pull back than not go far enough. Um, and
We all got to do that.
yeah.
Whatever you're doing, it's funny. We get so used to our shortcuts,
Mm-hmm.
and whatever your career, whatever it is you do, and it's a real simple shift. If you just give yourself permission, it's like I can always go. You can always pull it back, but that's why I'm a big fan of archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
Archetypes are a real quick way to pull 180s.
Yeah.
And it's like, just go for it. Just go for it. Go for the orphan. Go
Right.
for the innocent. You're going to get complete. Go for the ruler. Go for the destroyer.
Yeah.
You just the idea of it. And it's whether you're writing, whether you're, working at a McDonald's, just
Right.
to do
It's
things.
true. Yeah. It's because we're
Yeah.
always, well, I mean, I think as humans, we always are trying to like, binary one, two, and that's sort of, it's that idea. A lot of people, especially in the writers world, I
Mhm.
think sometimes people come in and an archetype to them is a cliche, but
Uh,
it's not. It's, to
right.
me, it's actually that concept of when you put boundaries, then you can it's more freeing to explore the edges of those boundaries and see where to push. Because, and also it is that sort of icon, that shortcut for an audience to say, oh, now I know all this and I can focus on all the specifics you're bringing to it, all the character development, the nuance. And so it is sort of, it, in a way, it's a shortcut, as you said, but it's not. But if you do the work, then it becomes so much more. Um,
it, it becomes essence. And this is the thing, is like archetypes always expand. Stereotypes are where we
mhm.
confine. We'll always
Yes,
be
great
limiting
distinction.
with the stereotype. And that's what's so fascinating, is we have all the archetypes in us. All That's
Hmm.
why they became archetypal.
Yeah.
It's we have them in us, and it's us identifying with those, which is always larger than us.
Hmm.
Right? It's never this is the thing too, is a character, a role is never the archetype. It's
Hmm.
always different, but the character has an archetype. But
I
the
see.
role itself, that's all of the nuance.
Hmm.
It's such a helpful, just what you're keying into, and I think that's really, it's an interesting territory to explore,
Hmm.
because when we do go to stereotype, yes, it's out right, and we're confining
Hmm.
our thought, but we're always looking for those opportunities to expand,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
And
I
that,
love that. And I
yeah,
mean, just to quick bring it back, like Point Break, I think that's one of the reasons why it's such a successful film, even with sort of these absurdities that are on the surface that you just accept. You accept it because you have very clear archetypes for your characters, yet they are, I mean, especially Bodhi's role, right? When Patrick Swayze embodied it,
yeah,
like it is his character, the charisma was unique.
yeah,
And it's, and it is that cult vibe. You could see exactly how you're like, oh, I like him, and then you find this cold side that is self-serving, and you're like, I can see exactly how I was brought in, and as everybody else would have been in
yeah.
the film. And so I really love that. And I think, I was reading, I was actually reading the Barbie travelogue book by Margot Robbie, and she has, what impressed me was, I'm like, oh, she has these concepts, right? One of the actors like yourself who really think about the craft. You care about it, so you explore it, you try it, and you learn it through trial and error, and also through the sort of uh, the ensemble that you're thinking about, that you're talking
Mm-hmm,
about beyond the cast, into the crew, into
mm-hmm.
the creative, behind the scenes as well. And it makes things more interesting. It's why a TV show may be, on paper, very hack script. We have so
Yeah,
many. I mean, NCIS is based on the same every time, but
yes,
successful when you get the uh the characters to be differentiated between each other, even though they're playing the same
yeah,
role, basically. And
yeah.
and that is something that an actor can bring to it. It's like the concept where a bad actor can kill a great line and a great
Mm-hmm,
actor can
mm-hmm.
save the most
Yeah,
cliched line.
yes,
And so I love that. I want to. We're getting close to the wrap up line. I think
yes.
we should went over what I had planned, which is great.
Oh, cool.
I love
Yes.
that. Um, what have you been working on? I know you have a film, I think, that you're in, coming out early next year or somewhere around there.
I
Um,
have this new NBC show. It's called the God, the excuse me, because it's like the Hunger um
Oh, I think I have it here. The hunting party.
hunting party is where they're landed on it now. So they're at the hunting party. So that'll be fun, but that's we'll see. They haven't released a date. They're still shooting it,
Mm-hmm.
and then working with a. I'll have to put up on my Instagram because there's a
Mm-hmm.
new film that I'm working with a young director who I really like. Her name's Tess Lafia. She's actually John Lafia's daughter, who was one of the
Wow.
creators of Child's Play.
That's right.
Um,
Which I mean, Don is a huge fan. We know
uh,
through friends of friends, very close, and so he's one of those people I'm working
oh,
to sort of
cool,
insinuate myself in. But which also is one of my favorite films of all time is Child's
uh,
Play in the series. But
cool.
that's going to be, I'm really excited about that. Yeah,
Yeah,
share it on your Instagram because we'll
I
follow,
will.
support, and all that
I'll
jazz.
put that on there, and then I will share if there's anybody on the East Coast because this is going to be a lot of fun. Is October 11th through 13th for the first time? It's a huge. We're taking over Salem, Massachusetts, with a lot of the Hocus Pocus cast. They've
Love
been trying to
that.
get us there, and we're doing a huge costume ball. It won't be like a traditional convention. It's made to be a celebration, like a party, because the town goes nuts over Hocus Pocus. Thousands of people come in
And
there,
Halloween
and
is it's busy, but
yes,
it's fantastic there. I've lived in New
yes,
Hampshire for many years, and that was always a
okay,
go-to all the time. And it's fun year round. But during
yeah,
Halloween, you get this great mix of people who are there for like the fun of costume Halloween and the people that kind
right,
of live it, you know?
yes, totally. And they're so it's gonna be there's like we're doing trolley rides, like a huge screening with ad lib commentary, and then they're doing a burlesque ball. So they've organized a lot. They brought in a bunch of people to collaborate, and I do think that'll be a lot of fun. So that'll be next month, and then we'll see. Like I'll post things on Instagram as it's coming. I know like the TV show and film are coming up, and we'll just see what else trickles. And I'm loving the audio space, to be honest.
Hmm. I
um
noticed you've been on some audio podcast dramas, correct?
yeah, and there's a new one that's i I don't even think I have it up on my credits, but there's a couple new ones that'll be coming out. I love it. I love playing the villains. I
Yeah.
just love them in these, in
Well,
the yes.
you have a voice too, because frankly, appearance wise, I would cast you as a lead, or you get cast a lot as. I noticed you have two types that on spot. You get one, which is kind of hilarious to me, is a meth addict, and
Right,
and
yes,
two is the serious police detective special agent,
yeah,
that kind of lead. And
totally,
I can see why, because you have a presence, you have your jawline, the whole deal. They
right,
see it and they get it. Um, and I think villain, then you can really feel it in your voice because you have a very confident that good actor grit, just a little bit, and you can probably
totally.
really work that in an audio space to circumvent any sort of feature concept. I am always
Yeah,
amazed when I meet someone who's voiced we're big animation fans, voiced someone that I always loved, and I'm just like, oh wow,
yeah,
wouldn't have pictured it. And to me that's a great that's a really great job. If you can break something that I have this pre-existent
yeah.
vision of, to such an extent that I never would have guessed it in a million years, that's a huge acting compliment. um
Yeah. And we can only, that's the thing with audio, right? Because people are using their own images. It's so important that we
mhm,
keep this audio space alive because for actors, it's a whole other way to transform because that's
mhm,
what you're doing, right? You playing with rhythm
mhm.
and volume. I mean, any of that, like playing with simply cadence and rhythm does so much. Very often it's the first way into a character for me. It'll
I
be
can see
voice,
that. Mhm,
and then it moves into physicality that's following the rhythm. uh,
mhm,
and then you can just bring it back. You can
mhm.
go in, make sure you go. Let's just say you're really like, what is this rhythm I'm playing with? And no, there's a dip, and you're finding that's coming first, the
Mhm.
audio.
And
So
it's
I do
deeper
like,
than
yeah,
accent, which I think is
yeah,
something that, especially on casting calls for voice work, because I've done a little bit myself and I'd love to
yeah,
continue to do more, is you see, it's a call sheet is very, very direct, and you have to bring the nuance. The most impressive roles we
yeah,
ever probably see or hear about or think about in our mindset, is Marlon Brando in Godfather, right? I mean, he
Yes.
packed his cheeks was the first thing he did when he showed people. And yes,
Yeah.
it's a look, but it changed his speech like
Yes. And
dramatically.
carried himself. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I kind of and I love that. I know Bradley Cooper's done some crazy voice work. I mean, Rocket Raccoon in the Marvel films, I didn't know. I was
Yeah.
like, who is that? And
Yeah.
it just becomes sort of I feel like as an actor, it probably allows you to explore things that you never would have had the chance to explore.
Totally.
Because like I know, and I love the story of Walt Disney, who, there's plenty of ideas that which I'm sure some are true, especially given the time that he had some racist leanings
Oh,
in certain cases.
right.
That's we're dealing with that now, thinking back
Yeah.
and working through things.
Our archive, right? This is it exactly,
Exactly,
like, culturally, when
exactly.
you look at the archive.
And I know as a white middle class guy,
Hmm.
I never experienced so much of what our friends and peers experience that now that's my learning curve, right?
Hmm.
And really understanding that. But he did this thing which I loved, which circumvents the bias, which is to cast his kid voice actors on the other side of a screen. So he had no concept of what they looked like. And
Cool.
and I don't know if who knows, it could be fully legendary or not, but I'm sure it happened at some
Yeah.
point. And that's sort of the idea that I think I love, because I especially love watching an animated film or listening to an audio drama where I don't see a name I recognize, and I love the character because
Yeah.
it allows, a lot of times we cast, which is wonderful too, but we cast a big star in our animated feature film
Yeah.
because it's a draw.
Right.
But there are amazing people
Ah,
who could do the role, who would, you know, they have the experience level with it,
that's
and
right.
they know the role. So I love when I see people moving between the spheres
Yeah.
of those. And I think
I agree.
and it can only help your on-screen acting, I imagine. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And my friends who are really deep in the voiceover say it's one of the most helpful tools they have for also what we're talking about with, like, quick, like, really changing your perspective,
mhm.
really giving you, if because they get used to making these dramatic shifts in their voice, people who do like commercial work and they want to give two varying takes, honing that to really make it different. Where what I think one of the first things people deal with voiceover is they think they're doing it different, but they're not.
Yes.
Right? It's like, okay, I'll give them two variety. But so the good guys and gals, they really learn how to, on a dime, give a
Mhm.
completely different point of view. And
Yes.
yeah, and
Commercial
so to be able to
jobs.
do that on,
Yes.
they can bring that into the camera
And
work.
voice acting is definitely one of those things where often when you're sending in a tape or something, they'll it's like, okay, now do three different. And then
Yeah.
when you listen back, especially when you're learning, you're like, those are all the same. Those
Right.
are all the same. You're like, no, you got to go farther. You got to go out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Oftentimes I always think, be the thing that would embarrass you in public.
Uh-huh.
That's where I want to experiment with, right? Do me as I feel like I'm most normal and controlled and
Yeah.
comfortable, and then do those levels until I get to that point. And sometimes, I think it
Yeah.
pays off. And like you said, it expands your toolkit. Um, Love it. I love it. Thank
Awesome.
you so much. This has been
Yeah,
fantastic.
thank you. This has been so fun.
I love it. And I would love to bring you and anybody else that wants to come down as well to at some point do a Q&A and then have a screening of Hocus Pocus out here, because that's, you
Oh,
know,
we should do it.
we
Yeah.
love it. And you know what, and trying to work on a whole revival theater setup, just because, as
Oh,
you
do
said,
it.
going through
Yeah.
the archives, I think that's the next step for us
Yeah.
in our filmic culture and television culture as well, is
Yeah.
really exploring things that we've done in the past. Because a lot of times I see things now, I'm like, oh, I haven't seen that before, and then I go back and I'm like, oh, it's a whole history up until now, and I just, that's the sort of thing that um I think can grab more and more people to get this nuance, really see the art as well as just enjoy film. I mean, there's always a
Yeah.
good point to that as well. Like sometimes I don't want people to to think about the whole process, because I want them to focus on the story. If someone were reading a short story I wrote and said, I can imagine him sitting at the table drinking a coffee, struggling over this line, I probably haven't done my job, right? They can think about that after they finish. So anyway, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Everybody,
Thank
what's your
you.
Instagram handle?
So it's just my name. Keep it simple, at Tobias Jelinek, like it's spelled there on the
Yep.
screen. Yeah, and that's great.
Jelinek.
Yes. Yeah. So that's the best way. And I'll I'm going to be putting stuff up there. So please stay in touch. And yeah, we'll do it again. We have more stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anytime, every
Cool.
project, come on. We're happy to have you. And, make sure everyone follow at Tobias Jelinek on Instagram. Also follow us, Colton Classic Films, if you haven't already. Make sure you check out coltonclassicfilms.com because we are continuing to do our distribution of ultra low budget films where proceeds go directly to filmmakers. So that is another way to support up and coming talent and these passion projects. We do not release any film where it is not a true passion project. So if you want something weird, if you want something different, if you want something you're not likely to see, and help support upcoming filmmakers so they can continue to expand, experiment, etc., check out coltonclassicfilms.com. Thank you so much. And to play us out, as always, is the Chud with All About Evil. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Colton Classic Podcast. This podcast is important to me, but what's more important are the rights, privileges, and freedom from violence of everyone in this country and in this world. And that means supporting Black Lives Matter. If you'd like to make a donation, please go ahead and visit coltonclassicpodcast.com, where we have a list of places you can donate and help out. And please stay safe.